Welcome to the Beyond Fat Loss podcast, where we don't just stop at fat loss, you'll learn all about the good stuff that follows too. How to build muscle, how to enjoy more food, and how to stay lean without going to extremes. We are your hosts, Sean and Katie, and today we're going to be discussing a fundamental change we made last year that has revolutionized how we coach fat loss. It actually blew our minds, and it made us realize how misinformed we had been about dropping body fat quickly.
After listening to this episode, you'll understand why faster fat loss is grossly misunderstood and how doing it properly is one of the best decisions you'll make. We'll also give you some insider info about how we've implemented faster fat loss into our coaching, allowing members to trim down in half the time without long-term restriction. In fact, they are able to keep body fat off for longer and spend more time building muscle and getting stronger than before. Now, we have got plenty to talk about on this episode, so let's get started, Sean.
And when it comes to getting started, where did we get started with all this? What led us to learning more about fast fat loss just over a year ago now?
Well, after starting online coaching, we were introduced to a whole new world of results, right? And that led us to question a couple of things. It led us to question, how do so many people get such fast results without messing themselves up? And what are people doing so differently to get these results?
I think it's important to note that you can never really see what happens to somebody after a fat loss transformation. It's quite rare that you get that sort of insight on social media. You see the before and afters, and you see the testimonial that comes from the fat loss plan. But what happens to them 6 months after? What happens to them 12 months after? But we were finding, the more we were looking into it, because it is something that we really wanted to do ourselves, is not just provide a short-term transformation, we wanted to provide the long-term result, that there were other coaches in that space that were keeping their clients for longer than 8 to 12-week challenges, that were promoting a transition back to building muscle, back to eating more food. And these people weren't gaining lots of fat back. This was after they'd already achieved very impressive weight loss transformations in the short term. And I think our mentality approaching this was very much, well, if somebody else is doing it, then that means it can be done. So maybe we need to look into this a little bit more to figure out what we don't know about this matter.
We always believed what most people believed, didn't we? Back last year, that fast fat loss comes in the form of extreme diets or extreme habits. And essentially that quick fixes don't last. It became clear to us that at least some people weren't using these. And we wanted the best for ourselves and our clients. So this is what led us to investigate this a little further.
There's always two ways you can look at it, right? When it comes to comparison, you can look at it and you can get upset about it and you can write yourself off and say you're not doing a good enough job or say you're a bit of a failure for not getting as good results as this. Or you can go, okay, well, there's some proof at least that this thing can work. There is evidence that this could potentially be done better. It's not that everything you learn will be applicable to you in your situation, but there might be some things that you pick up which you've been overlooking. And this was very much one of those scenarios. I think that it's fair to say that most of the information about losing fat slowly hasn't been put out there to harm people. It's been put out there to protect people from doing the things which we're all very familiar with, which lots of people have spent time, effort, and money on and got really poor results from. We're talking about weight loss shakes. We're talking about various diets which promise the world takeaway foods, leave you with a really strong disliking for particular food groups, but don't leave you with any sort of sustainable systems for fat loss to take forwards. All of these things have probably led to some negative experiences for a lot of people. And we naturally assumed that faster fat loss would leave an equal result to those things. And that's definitely not true from what we now know.
I fully agree. I think there's been so many bad experiences associated with crash diets or really low calorie diets, So naturally, I think as humans, also within the health and fitness space, coaches try and protect people's relationship with food, try and protect their relationship with health and fitness. And perhaps that's where a lot of the false or misinformation has come from regarding doing fat loss faster and more aggressive.
Yeah, it's not always coming from a bad place.
No.
It's trying to help you out and stop you from making a mistake. But the reality is that some of this information is inaccurate and it might be holding you back from getting some faster or better results that you could achieve if you knew how to do faster fat loss more effectively.
I held a bias of making fat loss sustainable so that you could sustain it for long enough to get the results you wanted for quite some time, quite a lot of my career, not even just my career, in my own journey. I held that bias. And I think it's important to challenge your own biases sometimes, because there's a whole other world out there that you can either choose to benefit from or not.
Yeah, it's not comfortable because it makes you feel like you've not learned some of the stuff that you should be learning. But the reality is, we've got this whole lifetime to learn, develop, to grow, to change our viewpoints on things. We can't do it all at once. Sometimes you take time to unlearn some of the stuff that you held in your belief system for a very long period of time too. Let's be honest, when we first started off as PTs and as coaches, Katie, we had a lot of members and a lot of clients come to us that had tried various diets and approaches, that have maybe even tried really aggressive approaches with other trainers or other coaches that didn't work for them. That they hated those sorts of approaches. They led to them hating the gym, hating exercise, led to them having really poor relationships with food. And again, these were aggressive fat loss approaches. They probably left a bitter taste in those clients' mouths. And when they come to you and you earn their trust in order to help them, the last thing you want to do with those individuals when they're feeling quite vulnerable and feeling quite uneasy about losing fat again is to put them on another really harsh diet and to put them on another really restricted protocol. That's probably not going to help them overcome their fears and to help them adhere to a fat loss protocol again. But having said that, you can very easily find yourself adopting a one-size-fits-all mentality then if you don't have other clients to balance that out that do successfully do a faster fat loss protocol and a more aggressive approach and have a great experience with it. Then you just naturally confirm your own bias and assume that all aggressive fat loss protocols mess people up and only the moderate, steady fat loss protocols work.
Yeah, fully agree. And as we know, there's no one size fits all approach when it comes to anything in health or fitness, never mind a fat loss method, right? We know the principle to lose fat across the board for everyone is being in a calorie deficit, but what method is used, there is no one size that fits all. So where did we learn a different approach then? And where did we start challenging our own biases and try learning a different method to what we've been used to? So I've been following Martin McDonald for, I couldn't even tell you. And I know you probably have followed him for a very long time as well, Sean. I can remember him being one of the first people that I followed when I started taking my health and fitness a lot more seriously, probably back in my early 20s. And more recently, he created a method called the aggressive dieting blueprint. It's very evidence-based. It's collated 50 years of research. 50 years of research. You know, that's a long, long time, and that's a lot of research that he's collated to bring together this aggressive dieting blueprint.
What is it? So the listeners can understand.
So the aggressive diet blueprint is an online course that comes with calculators that allow us to understand the exact calorie deficit that we should be in to allow us to get the faster fat loss result without putting muscle loss at risk. Can't quite remember how long the course was. I think we pretty much binged it over a couple of days, right? Because we were just so eager to learn all of the information. But there's quite a few modules, and we've rewatched it again since then. It's packed full of information, not just follow this method in this way and you'll get X result. He deep dived all of the pros, the cons, looked at both sides of the arguments, as well as bringing together or bringing to life an actual method to follow. And I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about all of the evidence behind it throughout this podcast, right? So I don't want to go into that too much right now. But Martin McDonald has been talking about more of an aggressive approach to fat loss for some time now. It's just more recently he's brought this together as a course.
Bear in mind that we went into this course as non-believers. So we signed up for a course to pay to learn about something that we weren't actually very strong advocates of. We finished the course and we both completely changed our perspective. We'd both completely flipped our minds on this because, as Katie said, Martin did a great job of explaining the pros and cons to the research that we have. But when we look at it, like totally look at both sides and we view it from an evidence-based perspective, it is almost impossible not to feel like a more aggressive approach is the better option in the majority of scenarios.
Why would you say that, Sean?
Well, the more we go into the podcast, the more we'll find out, right? But if I was to summarize in one sentence, it's that results are one of the biggest drivers or motivators to losing fat. And it's also one of the biggest factors for adherence. Results are one of the strongest predictors of long-term fat loss maintenance. And when you support the short-term results that people achieve with a fat loss protocol by adding behavioral and lifestyle changes as well and support with those, then you're basically setting somebody up to not only have accelerated fat loss results, but a much higher probability of sustaining those fat loss results afterwards.
I think you summarised that pretty well. Goes back to results, isn't it? Results being the main thing we're looking for from any method or protocol that we follow. And the quicker we can see results, the more we're bought into that process. The more we're bought into a process, usually the better results we get, right? So it goes hand in hand.
It's easier to stick to something that we know is working.
Absolutely. If you know something works, it's easier to go all in on that than trickle along with something that you're unsure is working, which most likely will lead to a little bit more disengagement and then slowly just going off the track altogether.
It's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm not going to get the results I want from this, therefore I'm not going to give it my full effort. And because you're not giving it your full effort, you're then not going to get the results you want. So you need to get some results from anything that you do in order for you to gain more buy-in, for you to trust it more, for you to back yourself more, and for you to fully commit to that method as best as you can. Katie, I think you've learned a little bit more about this in your course as well.
Yes, it's coming to light a little bit more there too, which is exciting again, right? It's giving us even more confidence in the new methods that we are learning about and how to apply them. And I've just dabbled a little bit now in module 3. The lectures coming up over the next few weeks are going to go into this in a little bit more depth. I am going to learn more about whether moderate versus faster is better throughout my course. And the course I'm referring to, and by the way, is Level 5 Advanced Nutritional Science Diploma that I'm studying with Mac Nutrition. And so far, what I've been learning is what we've already been discussing in this podcast. It's given me more confidence in the methods that we're coaching already.
Let's bring this back around because we want to remain as impartial as possible, despite the fact that we have pretty clear evidence in one approach being better than the other. But we want to balance it out with both sides, right? And we want to say that we do understand why moderate diets are promoted so much. And we understand that there are risks to going into a more aggressive approach for some individuals. Moderate deficit may be a better approach for them and a slightly more safe approach for them. And they do work. Moderate deficits do work. We still do moderate deficits with some of our members too, but they don't work as well for everyone. And one of the main reasons for this is related to time, because they will take more time than a more aggressive approach. And some individuals find that time and how long they spend doing a fat loss approach is one of the biggest reasons why they can't stick to the process long enough to get the result they want. They can go harder with a deficit, but only if it's for shorter time periods. The length of the fat loss phase can lead to them dropping off before they get to the result they want with more moderate approaches. That changes on a case-by-case basis.
But it's understanding what methods are there, right? So you can choose what is the best method for you, understanding the pros and cons to all options.
Yeah, absolutely. Moderate approaches used to be our default stance. It's changed now, and we now favour an aggressive approach, but it has to be suitable to that person at that time.
I agree. And I think we just had a bit of a blind spot previously when it came to aggressive fat loss due to a bit of lack of knowledge, right? I'm not afraid to admit that because we all learn. There's plenty of information out there to keep learning. But we do believe after comparing both, like you said, Sean, we favour the more aggressive approach if it is appropriate for someone. But as always, it's a case-by-case basis. So tell me, Sean, what do most people get wrong about aggressive fat loss?
Let's reel off some of the common claims. So it's too restrictive. It's too hard. You feel too hungry. You lose more muscle mass. You regain fat quicker after the diet. It can ruin your metabolism. It can ruin your relationship with food. There's a lot. There's a lot of critique there.
Quite bold claims as well, right?
And you know what? You could probably find something to support all of these claims if you cherry pick the information a little bit, which often gets done when people are quoting research. What's important to consider is when you're designing comparisons between two different groups, there are certain things that need to be balanced between those two groups to make it a fair experiment. Things like the protein intake the individuals are on, things like the activity levels or the training of the participants, because these all play a part. It's easy to say that one thing is worse than something else.
If you're setting up a scenario to drive a particular outcome, and sometimes in research, depending on who funded the research and the research paper itself, who that was funded by, sometimes they can be biased, right? Depending on who they're funded by. And they're trying to drive a particular outcome. So perhaps the methods chosen aren't measured or fair or balanced.
There may be ulterior motives to them finding the result to favour a certain protocol. So it's important to consider what we call totality of evidence. So you have to see both sides of the coin, and then you can make your assumptions. You can never make the assumptions based on just one research paper. And what we have learned from the aggressive diet blueprint is that when looking at evidence over about a 50-year lifespan across pros and cons, that a lot of these claims that are being made are actually falsified by far more evidence than evidence in favour of the claims.
And unfortunately, some of the bold claims that we hear, they hang on to a cherry-picked one or two papers or research that support their claim, rather than taking all of the evidence available and going, okay, it's debunked that.
So let's go into it. It's too restrictive.
Oh, come on. All fat loss is restrictive, right? Let's not beat around the bush there. You are restricting your energy intake to drive the outcome of fat loss. Whether you're in a 500 calorie deficit, 800 calorie deficit, or 1300 calorie deficit, it's all restrictive. Yes, being aggressive means you need to be a little bit less flexible with choices, eat a bit less for taste and pleasure, perhaps, right? Because you haven't got quite as many calories to play with. To have some more of the tastier options, it's probably got to be a little bit more bland, naturally so. But actually, that may feel less restrictive if you only need to sustain it for 6 weeks compared to 12 or 15 weeks of a moderate deficit.
So, Katie, using your ever-famous chocolate analogy, if you were to remove chocolate from your diet for 6 weeks, or you were to remove it for 12 or 15 weeks, which one would probably feel more restricted to you?
I'm not going to have chocolate for 15 weeks.
So there we are. It's as simple as that. Like,
I get my name for myself here. It's a chocolate fiend, or I don't know.
But put it this way. Okay, that might not be the best comparison, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you were able to choose between eating less chocolate for 6 weeks or having to restrict all your calories for a total of 15 weeks, which one would make you feel more restricted?
The longer term, restricting for 15 weeks. That's a long time. What's that? Nearly like 4 months. And there's no doubt within that time, there'll be events on, there'll be things I want to enjoy. But if I've got to stick to a longer term deficit, that would probably make me feel more restrictive than just being a little bit less flexible for a shorter period.
And you can fit in 6 weeks of less flexibility a little bit easier than you can fit in 12 to 16 weeks of more flexible dieting. You're going to get much more events crop up over a 4-month period than you are a 6-week period. You could more intelligently select when you're going to do 6 weeks back to back and have a greater chance of finding a time where that works around all of your life and all of your events and schedule, rather than trying to fit 12 to 16 weeks in. And you might argue a case for, but if I'm not so low in calories, then it's easier to balance these things out. But let's be honest, any social event in a calorie deficit is really challenging. If it's a 400 or 500 calorie deficit, that's still going to cause you to have to really think about how you're attending that social event, what you're going to eat in the build-up, whether you need to move calories around and bank calories for it or not. So yes, you might be able to be a tiny bit more flexible, but it doesn't remove the restriction. There's still some form of restriction required in order for you to do that successfully. You're never going to get your time back. That's the thing. You'll get your biscuits back. Katie, you'll get your chocolate back, but you're never going to get your time back. So what's more valuable to you?
Absolutely, absolutely. When it comes to restriction, I think it's something that's easily feared, that we're all a bit apprehensive to expose ourselves to. When you break it down and actually think about a moderate deficit and it being equally as restrictive, really, but you're opting to do that for a longer period.
How does this actually play out in the real world? There was a study by Purcell and colleagues in 2014 where they compared two groups. One did a weight loss protocol that was more of a rapid weight loss protocol for 12 weeks against a group that did 36 weeks of gradual deficit. It was around 1,250 calorie deficit in the rapid weight loss group versus 400 to 500 calorie deficit in the gradual weight loss group. And what they found was that in terms of dropouts, 1 in 5 people dropped out in the gradual weight loss group over the 36 week period, compared to only 3% of people dropping out in the fast weight loss group. 1 in 5, 20%. 20% of people dropped out of the 36-week protocol versus 3% in the 12-week protocol.
Wow, it's quite a big difference.
And when they asked the reasons for why these people dropped out, the reasons were difficulty in adhering to the protocol, psychological and logistical issues, psychological stress and logistical issues. So essentially, they found themselves more restricted when they were doing a longer term protocol than people that were going nearly 3 times more in regards to their calorie deficit for a shorter time period. So the point is that just because you're eating less doesn't make it more restrictive. Time might play a bigger part in terms of how you perceive restriction than the amount of calories you're eating.
And what I took from what you said there about that particular research paper, you said about psychological and logistical barriers, right? That seem to get into the way more of people doing the longer term or 36-week deficit. Ultimately, when you're doing it for a longer period, over a shorter period, you're just opening yourself up to more opportunities for barriers to get in the way. I think that's an important note because there is a lot of elements and factors out there that have potential to sabotage your fat loss method, your fat loss journey.
Look at it like this in simplistic terms 36 weeks. 36 weeks is like 2/3 of a year, right? So whenever you start that protocol, you're either going to have to deal with summer or you're going to have to deal with winter and Christmas time. Summer and Christmas time, in my opinion, and based on some of the research, are 2 time periods where people gain a lot of weight in the year because they're very sociable periods. They have a change in circumstances and people are typically either eating out more, going to social events, or spending more time with their families. And there's an environmental factor to how much they deviate from a normal diet structure when they're spending more time with the family, like kids off school in the summer, staying around parents' houses in the winter, etc., etc. So if you're dieting for 36 weeks, then you're probably going to have to navigate one of those time periods. And there's a very good chance that it's harder to adhere to fat loss in those time periods. So thinking about when you strategically plan to do your fat loss phases, if you're doing a really slow, steady, longer approach, you might end up overlapping times of the year when naturally you're not as inclined to stick to your fat loss plan anyway. And that's like pushing sand up a hill. It's making it more challenging than it needs to be. That could be the reasons for why you have more psychological stress trying to stick to these plans. It could be a reason why you feel like it's more logistically challenging. All of this stuff adds more stress than what is necessary.
And then those stresses build up, stack up. Then you start thinking you're not capable of achieving it. Then you start thinking it doesn't work for you. And before you know it, you're not only just not being successful at your fat loss goal, you've actually started gaining weight. And then you're thinking, oh my gosh, what is happening? Why is this happening to me? It's a very important point to note actually with the holidays. And that's what's shown in the research, right? It's shown that most people typically are not gaining much weight in the day-to-day life. It's when they have holidays, whether that be Christmas or Easter, or whether that be summer holidays, whatever time of the years we tend to be a bit more indulgent. That's where the weight usually is put on and just not lost after, and then more weight put on the next time. And that's what the research is showing. Now, trying to do a moderate deficit over those periods, and if that's your only strategy, then you correctly said, Sean, it's like pushing sand up a hill. It's a bloody battle.
And think about it like this as well. The individuals that did 12 weeks of more restricted dieting, what if they got more weight to lose? Well, They've now had a successful experience with dieting because they've stuck to the protocol. Only 3% of those people in that group dropped out compared to 20% that dropped out in the longer protocol. So they can do their 12 weeks. They can then have a 12-week break, and then they can do another 12 weeks, and they'd be twice as far along as the people that dropped out doing the 36-week protocol. And they would have twice as much confidence because they have completed 2 protocols now. Whereas the individuals that aim for a 36-week moderate deficit that dropped out, they haven't even completed one yet. So what does that do for their self-belief? What does that do for their ability to back themselves when it comes to fat loss in future?
And that is huge. That is such a big part of any health and fitness goal is banking those positive experiences, proving to yourself you're capable of doing it, building up your confidence. The more exposure you can have to that, the more successful you're going to be in every phase you do. And it just highlights how important it is to have a long-term strategy and not only narrow your sights onto 6 weeks or 12 weeks or 3 months. And having that longer term strategy actually can give you confidence in this is what I'm focusing on here. And this is what I'm focusing on the other 3 months of the year, whatever it may be, right? It allows you to have more buy-in to that particular period that you're in.
Absolutely. On to another big claim. Aggressive fat loss is harder.
But is it? First few days of any deficit are always the worst. Let us be clear and honest there. A moderate approach might delay the symptoms of dieting for longer, but we all get them eventually. When you lose more weight, or you're doing it for longer, or you get really lean, everyone reaches that shit part eventually. A moderate approach may mean it is harder for longer, which that does threaten adherence, which we've established, right? But we do have strong evidence to suggest that it's actually easier to adhere to shorter, stricter fat loss strategies than slower, steadier fat loss.
So this perception that it's harder to do a more aggressive approach, there is research that refutes this belief. This is hilarious. But Knackers and colleagues, yes, Knackers, great name, in 2010 compared a faster weight loss group against a more moderate weight loss group and found that those who lost weight quickest attended more one-to-one sessions, group sessions. So as part of this study, they met up and they had support in the form of live sessions. So they attended more of these sessions. They completed more food records, which showed that they were more engaged and more adherent, as well as losing more weight than the moderate group. This is evidence that shows that a more aggressive approach led to the individuals being more engaged with the methods provided, more engaged with their calorie tracking, and they found it was easier to adhere to what the protocol encouraged them to do. So no, it wasn't harder for the people who were doing it more aggressively to stick to it. And there is a lot of research in support of this as well.
What is harder? Are you telling yourself more aggressive is harder? Because let's be real, the term aggressive sounds quite scary on its own, doesn't it? But why is it harder? Like, challenge that. Why?
I'm going to make a bit of a bold claim here, so brace yourselves. But I think the people that complain that aggressive approaches are too hard for them are the people that can't even do a moderate approach properly in the first place. I think that those that struggle to make better decisions, to regulate their emotional control better, struggle with being consistent, to struggle with saying no in certain occasions, struggle to achieve successful results even in a moderate protocol. If you got them to do a moderate protocol for the same time as an aggressive protocol, so 12 weeks each, they would struggle to stick to even a moderate protocol for that time frame. And I think that their perception then is that an aggressive approach is going to be even harder. And for those individuals, it probably would be because they haven't got the basic foundation of skills, nutrition control, better decision making, and self-regulation to put a calorie deficit first and their weight loss goals first, as opposed to other factors like short-term pleasure, short-term satisfaction, fitting in better in a public setting, etc., etc.
I don't disagree. And I think there is some truth to that claim. But I'm also going to flip that on its head a little because when this aggressive approach is actually followed and committed to, there's less decisions to be made. There's less flexibility. So sometimes these individuals actually find it easier to stick to an aggressive approach because there is a clearer yes and no to certain things. So whilst these individuals you think would struggle either on moderate or aggressive, deficits. I would argue to say that actually some people who struggle with moderate deficits don't necessarily mean they'll struggle with an aggressive deficit. But I do think people who can do an aggressive deficit can struggle with a moderate deficit because there's not as many clear yeses and nos to what they can have within their calorie limit.
That's a really good point. I think the big takeaway is that how you perceive your diet to be before you even engage in the diet will likely have a very strong impact on or strong influence on how you go in that diet. If you're already telling yourself that losing fat faster is going to be much harder, then it probably will be. Because you will not apply yourself as easily and as well to that process. You're already approaching it with a negative mindset about how it's going to go. Whereas if you go by the evidence that we have, which is that it isn't particularly harder and that a lot of people find it easier to stick to and more likely to complete, and you just approach it by saying, all diets are hard, this just means I get it done faster, then you probably have a greater chance of success.
Absolutely. I think the evidence shows it, right? But I think we can back this up with our experiences and our clients' experiences too, which we will come on to in this podcast. And we'll share a little bit about that a bit later on for sure.
I think what also leads to the claim that the diet doesn't work is the lack of an exit plan and aftercare for the post-diet period. So there isn't any continued structure and support after the diet is completed. And this is where things tend to go wrong. As we've discussed on many of the podcasts up until this point, maintaining many of the positive habits which you've built during fat loss is crucially important for long-term body fat management. It's not that you have to apply all the same methods that you did during fat loss. The things that you did to get those results can be left for fat loss. So, for example, if you restrict a load of foods from your diet, if you cut down on certain food groups, if you only eat in certain time windows during the day, you don't necessarily have to sustain those outside of fat loss. But what you will have to sustain are habits such as being aware of how many calories are in your food, how much activity you do on a day-to-day basis, how many grams of protein and fiber you get in your diet on a day-to-day basis, learning to pay attention to things like your hunger and your fullness. So you're not overeating when you're not hungry, choosing mostly whole foods in your diet and not consuming too many ultra processed foods. They're not diet specific. They're not fat loss phase specific techniques. They are things that you should be building into your lifestyle forever and maintaining these forever. They're not just a phase.
They're habits, right? They're habits. And those habits can be built through fat loss phases, then sustained after. It's the method that changes.
Yes. And there's a different method to coming out of a fat loss phase. Just like you have specific methods for what you use in your fat loss phase, there are different methods. There are different problems which occur when it comes to control with food, emotional regulation, and these are something which require their own dedicated time period and support channels in order for you to make the most of them. Next claim, you feel hungrier when you're doing an aggressive approach. Makes sense, it makes logical sense. Less food should equal more hunger. But does this actually happen?
I'm just going to say, I'm keeping it real here. I was like, no way am I going to do this aggressive diet and actually feel less hungry. That's not bloody possible. Not possible. Because honestly, this is one of the points that us parapiggies we're most concerned about.
Speak for yourself, Katie.
No, I can take this to my grave and speak for you on behalf of that as well. But serious, it was something that I was like really skeptical over, thinking, no way, like I'm already hungry in a moderate deficit, slash my calories even more, and I'm literally going to be unbearable to be around.
There's two key parts to this. Firstly, you don't necessarily need to eat less in terms of portion sizes, in terms of food volume. There are ways to have more food volume for less calories that can work in favor. So you don't need to eat less, you just need to eat more wisely. Your calories need to be used more wisely. But secondly, there is actually research to suggest that hunger levels plateau and that hunger hormones are downregulated during periods of high energy deficiency. In other words, your body doesn't produce the hunger signals as much when it doesn't have the energy to create. And also other effects like delayed gastric emptying can occur as well, where food sits in your stomach for longer, which leaves you with the perception that you're fuller for longer. So no, you don't necessarily feel hungrier when you're on an aggressive approach. And that has certainly been our experience and our clients' experience.
Believe it or not, guys, he's speaking the truth there. He's speaking the truth there. And I was very, very surprised.
I
Very
was
surprised.
I was super skeptical too because, as you know, Katie, as you know, Katie, I'm saying this like you know,
I was like, what was that, Sean?
I do eat a bit, fair bit.
I would never have said that about you, Sean. Never.
I've got a big appetite. I burn a lot of calories every day, and I feed myself well. I was really worried about how much the hunger levels were going to impact me if I reduce my food intake, but I found it to be the opposite. I found that I wasn't thinking about food as much as when I did longer, more moderate deficits. I found that my hunger levels were more consistent, so I could pretty much pinpoint and predict the exact hours of the day where I was going to start to get hungry, and it was normally an hour or two before meal times. And outside of those meal times, I wasn't anywhere near as hungry as what I would normally be when I was doing a moderate deficit, where hunger was probably pronounced for longer periods and probably was greater in terms of its magnitude. When I felt hungry, I felt way more hungry. And these were effects that were very different to what I'd experienced in the past when I'd done my previous fat loss phases. And this is really interesting, but there was a meta-analysis in 2014 by Gibson and colleagues, and they found that individuals doing an aggressive diet had less hunger and more fullness compared to maintenance calories. It was only a very small effect. It was only a very small difference in hunger. But what makes this so interesting is it didn't even compare to moderate deficits and compared to being at maintenance. If aggressive diets don't actually make you hungrier than being at maintenance, then they're probably going to be even better than moderate deficits.
Absolutely right. And the research actually shows that you have increased hunger at moderate deficits compared to maintenance, whereas with aggressive deficits, hunger decreases. So what's going to be easier for you to lose fat, when you're hungry or when your hunger hormones are suppressed a little?
Yeah, I think it was a Coutinho paper in 2018. They compared a moderate deficit group versus a rapid weight loss group where their hunger scores were reported to be lower. In the faster weight loss group, they looked at hunger levels between meals and after meals, and they found that there was only a significant decrease in hunger levels when individuals were following a rapid weight loss protocol rather than a moderate weight loss
Mhm.
protocol. So people were less hungry after and between meals.
And hunger, right, is one of the biggest threats when it comes to any of us successfully losing fat. Because it's when we're hungry, that's when we make poorer decisions. That's when we want to grab something on the go. That's when perhaps we'll just eat a little bit too much of something, which threatens us staying in a calorie deficit, which then threatens us actually losing body fat.
One more thing to add with hunger. As you know, we like to be evidence-based. We like to balance both sides. We also like to consider the human element to coaching. But on this one occasion, I have to say this one thing. When it comes to hunger, if you're doing a fat loss protocol, whatever fat loss protocol you're doing, hunger is part of it. You're going to be hungry. You cannot avoid it. You can't eliminate it altogether. You can use strategies to reduce it. There are certain things you can do with your diet and meal timings to delay or reduce the impact of hunger. But if you're losing fat and you start to get leaner, you're going to get more hungry. That's normal. Don't keep moaning about it. It's part of the process. And on this one occasion, you've just got to suck it up, buttercup, and get on with it.
Sadly, he's right. I used to hate that part of our deficits being hungry. So it's just like my worst nightmare being hungry. And Sean's got a massive grin on his face now while he's looking at me, but it was. And the reality is,
There is nobody in the world that feels as hungry as Katie. According to Katie.
just a little mean sometimes, isn't he, guys? Just a
I
little bit
think
mean. But no, all jokes aside, I genuinely used to like, "Oh, I don't want to do it because I don't want to be hungry." It's part of it's part of the journey. You're not going to be hungry forever, especially if you learn how to come out of it effectively and get back to more food, right?
but more importantly, your fear of being hungry meant that you were eating slightly more calories in a calorie deficit. Therefore, you were more hungry than what you would have been if you'd have gone more aggressive.
Yeah,
And it seems like the most counterintuitive thing in the world to
really
think
does.
about. But if you'd eaten less calories, you would have been less hungry. That's backed by research, that's backed by evidence, and that's backed by the experience that you have now had by doing a more aggressive approach.
And I've tried all of the approaches. I can tell you the pros and cons to every approach. I know we're going to talk a bit later anyway. But that is the truth. I probably wouldn't have feared being hungry quite as much if I actually knew about this approach earlier, but actually leaned in on being a bit more aggressive, because I probably wouldn't have felt as hungry and then just felt like I could have sustained it for longer. Another claim: you lose more muscle on aggressive approaches. And this used to be another big barrier for us too, right? Because you work hard to build muscle, you don't want to risk losing it. You really don't want to risk losing it. If you're not training and you don't eat protein like most quick fix dieters, of course you're going to lose muscle mass, right? Of course you are. But if you have a high protein intake and you're training with weights regularly, there isn't a risk of losing more muscle, even with a very large calorie deficit.
So factors such as how lean you are and how long you diet for can lead to an increased muscle loss. But this isn't exclusive to aggressive deficits. That's universally true for all calorie restriction. Doesn't matter if you're in a 300 calorie deficit or 1,000 calorie deficit. If you're getting leaner and leaner and leaner, then eventually you're going to start to lose muscle. It's determined by the lack of body fat you have to supply the excess energy to make up the shortfall, rather than the exact amount of deficit that you're in. And if you do a fat loss phase for a really, really long period of time, eventually you're going to start to eat into those muscle stores a little bit more. So
I think it's important here to note, though, that you are going to want to accept that any cut can lead to some muscle loss, right? I think that's important to note. But you can get that back very quickly too. But here's the thing: if you spend less time in the cut or less time losing body fat, you'll be able to spend more time getting it back and regaining it afterwards.
yeah, and if you save your time in your cut because you've gone more aggressive, then not only do you get time back to regain it, but you'll have even more time to start gaining more muscle tissue too.
Another big win for the aggressive diet protocol, right? So far, the claims are being debunked and the wins are stacking up. What about the claim you regain quicker after an aggressive fat loss method?
This is probably the biggest claim of the lot.
I used to believe it. Did you?
Absolutely, yeah. It was one of the main reasons why I recommended that people don't do it, because you thought they were going to regain faster.
Because they lost so quickly that they're going to rebound really quickly too.
And many people actually have this experience as well after some sort of aggressive fat loss method. So we cannot discredit it entirely. Does this come down to the fat loss method itself? When we spoke earlier about not just looking at minor details and looking at the bigger picture, this is what we mean. So what does the data actually say about this claim? Do people regain weight faster in controlled conditions with these aggressive diets?
Doesn't seem to be the case, does it? Doesn't seem to be the case with the evidence that we've got. Because they lose more during the process, they still end up with a greater net loss than those doing a moderate approach, is what we are seeing in the evidence, right? In the data.
Yeah, I'm going to give this a go, but I think it was Pokarinen and Mustayoki.
Doing a better job of me. I was looking at those names thinking, gonna leave that one short.
I could just be making up words there. 1997. So this is one of the papers that's actually quite old, but good evidence and good research does not go out of date, right? They looked at two groups where an aggressive dieting group lost 22.9 kilograms compared to a behavior therapy group that lost 8.9 kilograms in the same time frame. But after this, when you compare the dropout rates between these groups, 56% of people dropped out of the aggressive diet group before it finished, and only 28% dropped out of the behavior therapy group before that finished. So on the surface, it looks like it was worse for the aggressive diet group. However, the aggressive dieters had already lost an average of 7.7 kilograms before they dropped out of the study. So those that completed the behavior therapy group lost 8.9 kilograms on average. Yet even those that dropped out of the aggressive protocol had already lost 7.7 kilograms before they dropped out. So it's not that much less than the individuals who managed to do the whole thing for the behavior therapy group. What was even more interesting was when they reviewed these individuals 5 years later, the aggressive diet group had sustained on average 16.9 kilograms of their weight loss versus only 4.9 kilograms sustained in the behavior group. So percentages wise, the AD group sustained 74% of their weight loss and the behavior therapy group sustained 55% of their weight loss. So even if you stop early on an aggressive diet plan, you will still achieve significant weight loss, and your long-term maintenance does not seem to be negatively impacted by going more aggressive in the first place.
So aggressive dieters don't continue to regain more weight than moderate dieters, so it seems.
And it doesn't stop, and moderate dieters are not prevented from regaining weight either. They still regain a fairly sizable amount of weight.
So actually going aggressive or doing an aggressive fat loss protocol just puts you in a better position overall because you've lost more body fat. So even if you do regain a little, you're probably still faring quite well.
Yep.
But why do some people regain weight then? Or regain body fat? Why are people doing that?
I think we can say quite clearly that it's not because it's more aggressive, it's because they don't have sustainable habits
Mm.
and a lifestyle which supports them to stay leaner.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's not very rarely the fat loss method itself. It's the habits that are either built or not built during that process, right? Build great habits, sustain them afterwards, then probably your uncle, you're probably going to do quite well. Do aggressive fat loss, don't bother changing your habits of lifestyle, risky territory, danger zone. You are more likely to revert back to not maybe where you started, but closer to where you started than where you finished.
In my experience, most people don't have a problem with restricting themselves for certain time periods in order to get a result. They have a problem with moderating their intake when they don't have restrictions and more tight targets in place. For example, when they finish their diet, they don't worry about calculating maintenance calories or continuing to keep an eye on what they're eating. They don't continue the habits which worked well for them during fat loss, such as managing portion size, such as forming meals that are high in whole foods, protein, fiber, etc. They drift further away from what achieved them successful results in the first place, and they don't really give themselves enough compelling reason to start fueling their body for other things other than fat loss. Be that a performance goal in the gym, be it changing body composition, building muscle. The focus has and only will be on fat loss, and this means that once fat loss is over, there's nothing really to work towards. There's no reason to keep an eye on things. They want to maintain their results, but that's not enough to override their natural tendency to overconsume calories or to lack moderation of consumption of things which they find it very easy to overeat.
Because the pull to the goal that no longer exists isn't strong enough to want to sustain the habit because there is no goal or desire to work towards because you've reached your fat loss goal and you haven't reviewed what's next.
When you have emotional buy-in for a goal, it makes the chance of you sticking to that goal and achieving that goal much stronger. When you're emotionally connected to your goals, it elevates them to a higher sense of importance, and the feedback you get in terms of a positive feedback loop when you're working towards those goals can be a very motivating and makes you feel more likely to continue in your attempt to achieve more results with that goal. Fat loss is a very emotionally led goal to have. It's often driven by a lot of emotion, whereas when people finish fat loss, that emotion kind of dissipates and there's not really another goal that replaces it that has as much emotional leverage as the fat loss goal did in the first place. I think a lot of people find it hard to then motivate themselves. They find it hard to get upbeat about what comes next. They might not even know what that is because there's not that excitability.
Or connection to a different goal, right? When you have worked towards fat loss maybe a few times in your life or currently, it's easier to say no to certain things. It's easier to stay engaged and driven in the process because you are connected to that goal of fat loss, of getting to a specific place with that. The closer you get to that and you start saying goodbye to the pain points that you had with that, whether that was low confidence, whether that's feeling comfortable with your clothes, whether that was feeling really lethargic, low energy, whatever those were that made you take the step towards the fat loss goal initially, they're no longer there. So you haven't got that connection to those anymore. So you're now in a place where you're not really connected to anything.
There's no urgency. There's no panic alarm going in the background.
No, and that's a good thing, right? You don't want to be living your life in a panic state and feeling like you have to take action all the time, like, oh, or else this is going to fail, whatever it may be.
Absolutely not.
But it's important to recognise it's absolutely normal when you get to the end of to a fat loss goal or close to your end fat loss goal, that those feelings are normal because that your goalposts now have to move. You've grown past that initial goal. So it's time to then just take a step back and reflect and think, right, I'm there now. So what's next for me? What's going to allow me to tie my actions to something that is greater than fat loss?
Or even better, in my opinion, you start thinking about this before you're done with fat loss. You start thinking about what comes next whilst you're going through that period of fat loss. A great time to do this is if you take a diet break or a maintenance week from fat loss. So when you start having more food come in, when you start going to the gym and you've refueled a little bit in the middle of your fat loss phase, and you have a bit more energy, you have a bit more focus, you get a taste for what it's like to experience more food, greater performance, less fatigue. So start thinking about it in that moment where you've got some experience of what the future could look like for you. What are you going to do with all this extra energy? What are you going to do with all this extra focus? What are you going to do with this enhanced performance that you haven't been experiencing so far? If you can come up with some sort of target or goal and some direction for what happens beyond fat loss, then this not only makes you more likely to achieve greater body composition maintenance when you come out of fat loss, but it probably makes you more likely to do a really good job of fat loss because now you have a carrot that's dangling in front of you that you want to get to. There's a reward at the end of your fat loss period that is now exciting to get to and start working towards.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tie that back into regaining quicker, right? Because all of that was really important points for sure. But you don't necessarily regain fat quicker because of an aggressive diet protocol. It's not what we see in the research, and it's not what we've seen and experienced with real life clients either.
Everybody loves to talk about their metabolism, don't they, Katie?
Yes, this is a drum that's been banged on many times, many times.
And one of the claims that gets made is that losing fat more aggressively can ruin your metabolism.
But you know what else can ruin your metabolism, Sean?
What's that?
Chronically undereating because you never actually get to an end point you're happy with during fat loss. Your metabolism is not going to thank you if you are consistently undereating, underfueling, not giving your body the fuel it needs. And you're worried about an aggressive diet protocol ruining it when your lifestyle for perhaps some time now is already doing that.
Your metabolism is going to decrease and it will slow down over time the longer you diet for. And it can decrease if you're more aggressive for that time. But with appropriately set up aggressive fat loss, you have maintenance breaks or diet breaks in order to help prevent your metabolism declining too much to the point where you have to keep eating less calories to drive a greater fat loss result. If you also keep up your daily activity and you maintain as much muscle mass as possible, then you get an additional small but additional benefit for keeping your metabolic rate as high as possible. But there's no denying that your metabolism is going to drop over time as you lose fat. The problem that people have is they associate aggressive fat loss with continual, non-stop hammering away with really low calorie deficits. And you don't necessarily have to do that. You can take some breaks in order to stop the continued lowering of metabolic rate.
And it's advisable to take breaks when you do an aggressive protocol, right? Because it's aggressive by nature to drive a result. You don't want to be doing that consistently. So having some breaks throughout that, whether that's through a refeed or whether it's through a diet break, anywhere from a week to 4 weeks, is helpful, is important. And I think that's the part that a lot of people miss when they dive into an aggressive protocol.
And you can recover from metabolic adaptation when you spend enough time at maintenance calories again. But if you don't give yourself a chance to get to maintenance calories because you're constantly doing a really long, slow fat loss phase, then you won't get a chance to recover from metabolic adaptation. If you're burning less calories every day, then it would be great for you to get back to a point where you can burn more calories every day. Because then guess what? You get to eat more food. You have to worry less about trying to be so stringent with your calorie targets. This is about not digging yourself a deeper hole than what you will already naturally find yourself getting into. If you've got a lot of weight to lose, then over time you are going to notice some reduction in your metabolic rate, in how many calories you burn per day. But if you do this, if you run a really long fat loss phase for very long periods of time, you're digging yourself a deeper hole and it's even harder to get out of it.
Final big claim then, it can ruin your relationship with food. It's just false. It's actually quite the opposite, which again surprised me quite a lot. but it is the opposite when done correctly. Got to add that, right? Because it could potentially worsen your relationship with food, but done correctly, it just is quite the opposite. And it's what we've experienced, it's what our members have experienced. You just learn to appreciate your food more. You eat more mindfully in the moment. You chew a little bit more. And any of my friends and families listening to this will be laughing, right? Because I'm known for my speed with eating. I'm known for my speed with eating. Even over our local pub, the waiter knows that. And yeah, he's had a few little digs here and there, right? Cheeky bugger.
He's quite impressed, isn't he, when he comes
Yeah.
over and he's like, "How's everyone's food?" And it's like, "Katie's is gone." And he's like, what happened? Where'd you put it? Where'd it go?"
And I'm like, oh, please. No, but all jokes aside, it does teach you to be more in the moment with it, to be more mindful, chew your food, eat without distraction, and just pay more attention to your hunger signaling and when you're actually full. Because I think we're all probably guilty of just eating on the go, rushing through our food with how busy life is. Claiming that aggressive dieting alone can ruin your relationship with food, it's not accurate, and open up your mind to the possibilities of how it actually could help your relationship with food.
I think what probably harms people's relationship with food far more is just chronic dieting, going through binge restriction cycles where you restrict for too long, or going through periods of small or moderate calorie deficits, but then having these pockets of excessive overconsumption on weekends or during events. These are the yo-yo dieting or binge restriction classic approaches that will lead to you being stuck in the restricted state for longer and longer. And then because you're in that state, it's harder for you to self-regulate when restricted foods are reintroduced. So when we talk about self-regulation, we're talking about the ability to manage your emotions and behaviors when a situation or circumstance changes. So when you go from being in a more restricted, I'm working on fat loss mindset, to then going back to eating more food again, it can be even more challenging to know how to navigate that correctly when you haven't spent time connecting with your feelings and your body's response to food, when you haven't been paying attention to things like your hunger levels, your satiety response, eating slowly, eating mindfully. You just end up running on autopilot, over consuming all the things which you restricted or took out because you've spent so much time without these things in your diet and without paying attention to what food does for you in a better place, that you can't stop yourself. You can't physically hold back from all these things you're reintroducing.
It's a kid in a candy shop, isn't it?
That to me is far more devastating to your relationship with food than saying, okay, so I'm going to knuckle down on this fat loss phase, 6 to 8 weeks. I'm not going to have any pointless snacks which add more calories but don't fill me, and I'm going to cut out alcohol.
Yeah, I fully agree. I fully agree with you. I think it's important to understand that aggressive diets are not rules, they're choices. They're choices designed to achieve a specific result. And it's not, I'm not allowed to eat that. It's choosing not to because it's unhelpful to my current goals. And that's the big difference. And that can actually help your relationship with food because it's pro-choice. I'm choosing not to have this particular food because it is just going to be really costly for me calorie-wise, not going to help with my hunger levels, probably going to make me overeat later in the day because I don't have any calories left to play with. Not because it's bad, not because it's really unhealthy for me. That's a completely different mindset to have when you can choose why you're having that food or not having that food in that particular moment, in that particular phase, whatever it may be.
The less time you spend doing any form of restriction, the more time you can spend learning how to eat foods without setbacks. And that's probably a more valuable skill in the long run.
Yes, I know we are talking about a more aggressive, more restrictive approach. However, I can't shout loud enough from the rooftops. You don't want to be in a restricted state any longer than necessary. So the quicker you can do that and the quicker you can get out of that, the better.
Any form of restriction is still restriction, it still sucks.
And slow and steady wins the race comes to mind.
Look, I gotta say it, just bullshit. Bullshit. Try telling that to Lewis Hamilton or Usain Bolt. Where would they have got to? There's a time and a place. There's a time and a place for slow and steady, but it doesn't have to be the default option. Sometimes there's more problems that can occur by going slow and steady with something. There are physiological problems that can occur, like the ones we've discussed, when you try and do a slower or steadier approach with things. There are psychological problems like feeling chronically restricted, obsessing over things like scale weight that are going down by really small amounts, feeling demotivated, struggling to adhere to a particular plan or protocol, which then makes you lack self belief and confidence. People simply don't realize how much there is to learn and be gained from being outside of fat loss because they spend far too much time in fat loss. And part of the reason for that is because they never realize they're just slowly going round and round in circles. So you're not going to win the slow and steady race if you don't finish the race.
On the other hand, they may realize it, but they're too afraid to commit fully to a more aggressive approach to change it for many of the reasons that we debunked earlier on. But if you're listening to this, know that slow and steady doesn't have to be the only way. And it may actually be keeping you stuck. And none of us want to be stuck, really, do we?
Nope. I
And
don't
if
want
that,
to. I don't want to be stuck with you and stuff. No, I don't. I don't want to be stuck with you in a slow and steady approach forever.
I wouldn't want to be stuck with me in a slow and steady. I'd end up hating myself. Oh my God, I'd be moaning left, right, and centre. I'm hungry.
It's a life threat.
It's a bit like prison, isn't it?
A risk to life.
All jokes aside, if that's you and you're stuck in that slow and steady approach, or don't even want to go into fat loss again because you've been stuck in that slow and steady approach in the past, then we can help. On March the 10th, we are launching our sculpted coaching package, which is designed to help you cut your fat loss time in half. Without extreme methods, without long-term restriction. You'll not only be taught how to lose fat quickly and safely, you'll be taught how to move on after fat loss, back to building muscle and keeping it off. To find out more information, use the link in the description to get everything you need sent to your email inbox. You can also reach out to one of us or book a free call-in to chat in person if you prefer to.
When it comes to following aggressive fat loss approaches, does everyone have to follow the same approach with this?
Absolutely not. There are different approaches out there. I think the beauty of the aggressive approach is that different methods can work, right? They can work.
What are some of the ones that have worked for you, Katie, and what have also worked for your clients?
So you've got the 2-on, 1-off approach, where you do 2 weeks in a calorie deficit or a more aggressive calorie deficit, and you take a diet break. You could do 3 weeks on, 1 week off. You could do 4 weeks on, 1 week off. I've probably tried all of those approaches, particularly around playing sport. And all approaches have worked. They have worked. I've had results in all approaches. I think I've had clients that have used many different ones. For example, some women who particularly find the time around their period a bit more challenging, a bit more stressful. Perhaps they get more cravings, appetite levels that increase. For them to be in fat loss during that week is more challenging for them, perhaps in comparison to someone else. So having a 3-on, 1-off approach works better for them. But for other people, that might not be the approach because that might just be a bit too slow or a bit too long, right? There are many factors that influence what method is going to work for an individual.
During my aggressive diet last year, I opted to run the most time efficient way of doing it. So this was 3 weeks of aggressive dieting followed by 3 days of refeeding. Those refeed days were very high calories and very high carbohydrates. Won't go into too much detail about the purpose of those for now, but essentially it's to recover and replenish your energy stores as quickly as possible before you go back into your next phase of dieting. So the advantage of that is if you do a 3-day refeed as opposed to a week in a diet break, then you're just saving a few days. So I wanted to test the limits with this and see how I could get on. So essentially 3 weeks, then 3 days of refeed, then another 3 weeks of aggressive diet. Total time was less than 7 weeks. You're talking 6 weeks and 3 days for the total time of that diet protocol. Probably the fastest and most impressive fat loss results I've ever got in my life. And that is an approach that works really well. But what I would say is those refeed days, I found them harder than the actual aggressive diet period itself, because the amount of food that you have to eat and with how much of that food comes from carbohydrates means that you have to be even more targeted and even more restricted to some extent with what food you're eating.
I second that, Sean. I think they're actually a little bit more restrictive than refeeds, believe it or not. Using a couple of days refeeds, lots of calories, great. But actually, to successfully do them, they take a lot of attention to detail in terms of keeping your fats extremely low and bumping up your carbohydrates really high. and I've got a sweet tooth, but my gosh, that was something else to be able to get that amount of carbohydrates in.
The clients that we've run these refeed days with have expressed that the refeed days are harder than the diet itself as well. And next time they do an aggressive fat loss protocol, they will opt for taking a week at maintenance instead
Yeah,
of the
because
refeeds because it's more practical for them and it's more enjoyable and it's easier to set up. I will probably go for the refeed days again because I'm a bit of a lunatic like that. But there are multiple approaches that work, which is the point to this.
absolutely. For me personally, I haven't decided if I'll do the refeed or a diet break when I do it next. I am going to keep my options open to see what I feel like at the end of the 3 week AD and whether I think I can manage a refeed or if I just need to take a step back and have a week at maintenance calories. And this is where knowing these skills and tools are important so you can slot them in when it suits you.
I know some of your clients, Katie, have had success with longer breaks as well. We talk about like 2 on, 1 off, 3 on, 1 off. You've had members that have taken longer than just 1 week off to great success, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it just comes back down to what's going on in your life at that time. What are your stress levels like? What events have you got coming up? What can you manage practically and emotionally during that time? What's your history like with dieting, your relationship with food? There's so many different factors as to why, but longer term diet breaks in between fat loss, they can really work effectively and stop you just spiraling after potentially a restrictive period rather than throwing your toy to the pram because it's been really restricted and really hard, right? The fat loss period. You're not just going into a time where you're not focusing on anything. You go into a time where you've got a longer break to have more food, have more flexibility in a controlled manner, and show yourself that you can bank another skill that's going to help you long term.
For sure. There's two really big benefits to having longer breaks in between cycles of aggressive dieting as well. The first one, like Katie mentioned, is that you get more experience eating more, enjoying more food. You can actually experience this in between your fat loss phases. So then you don't have as much fear about what happens when you fully finish fat loss and you're fully done and you're looking to maintain this for the next 6 to 12 months. So that's point one. And point two is that some individuals have much more fat than lose than what they're capable of losing in a short period of time. And by taking longer breaks in between, they never reach that point where their metabolism starts dropping too much. They never reach that point where they feel like they're restricted for too long. They don't feel like their performance in the gym suffers so much. They don't lose so much muscle mass. So all of these things mean that every time they go back to a more aggressive approach again, they're more likely to be motivated and adhere to it than somebody that just continues to plug away with fat loss while they've got all this other negative stuff that's going on. So by giving them longer breaks, even though it feels counterintuitive, because while they're having that break, they're not necessarily working towards their fat loss goal. When they go back to it and they can attack it with more aggression, they're getting much further along than where they would have been if they were on and off because they couldn't stick to it. It's still a win. And they're picking up this maintenance skill in every time they have a small break anyway. I'm not sure about your experience so far, Katie, with your clients, but from my experience, I think the maximum amount of time that somebody can do really aggressive approaches for would probably be maybe 10 to 12 weeks at most. And this is with regular breaks interspersed. I think once somebody has done like 10 to 12 weeks of aggressive fat loss, they will likely need at least a month or so of time away from focusing on fat loss.
I agree. And I think that's the upper limit, if I'm honest. I think 6 is usually a sweet spot until having a little bit of a longer break than maybe just 3 days or a week. 9, many have done that comfortably. When it starts going past that point, I think it just gets a little bit more challenging, potentially can impact your relationship with that protocol because it's gone on for a bit too long.
Yeah.
I think that's an important point to note, Sean, is that you were chatting about, the importance of the diet breaks between a longer term fat loss protocol for people who are potentially got a lot to lose. I think it's really important to protect your relationship with the fat loss protocol that you were using. I don't think that gets talked about enough. Yes, relationship with food you want to look after, but your relationship with the protocol you're using is so important because you don't want to dread going back into fat loss. You want to be, oh, do you know what? That went so well last time. I know I am capable of absolutely nailing that. Let me get back into that so I can get the results I want.
It's completely unrealistic to expect to never need to do fat loss again.
Mhm.
Just want to make that point. We naturally gain and lose weight throughout the year as humans. Even when we're trying to control it as much as possible, there will naturally be some weight gain or some fat gain that then we may want to lose at another point. There might be certain times a year where we prefer to look at our leanest. I always prefer to be leaner in the summer. I just feel more confident in myself. I feel better. Chances are I'm going to be going to the beach or going on holiday, and that's where I like to look at my leanest. I time my fat loss phases for that, and that's a normal cycle for a lot of people too. But even if it's not as targeted, there'll be times a year where perhaps we slightly relax on our goals. Perhaps we have more important things to enjoy, like social events and time with the family. We discussed seasonal weight gain, like over Christmas period or over summer. That fat, if we don't do anything with it, it's going to stay there. So chances are we're going to need to do a fat loss phase again. The least amount of time you can spend getting rid of the extra fat that you gain, the better. And I think it's important to note that keeping your relationship with the fat loss protocols, which work really well for you for fat loss, means that you can just go back to those that you know work whenever you do have these occasions where you need to lose a little bit of fat again. That's really valuable. You found something that works. You've got a working model. Why change it?
Agree fully. Agree fully.
A point on flexibility as well. Even if you're doing an aggressive diet approach, it's not entirely rigid.
No, it's absolutely not. There's always room for flexibility. When you understand the method, you understand the protocol, but you understand the principle that's getting you to the result, there's always room for flexibility.
It's like where we've had clients where they've gone, my birthday ends up being 2 days away from my end of my aggressive diet cycle. They've done 3 weeks and their birthday happens to be on week 2, day 6. And they're like, is it okay if I finish a little bit earlier? Of course it's okay. Of course it's okay. Like, no, you can't. There's a rule which suggests that if you don't finish 3 weeks, the entire 2.5 weeks are a complete waste. Absolutely not.
Even if your birthday landed on day 14 or day 15, you have a choice. You may not want to, I won't say celebrate, but you may not want to use your calories to celebrate your birthday that particular time, that particular year, or you may want to. So what are your options? You have a moderate deficit day that day, or you take a maintenance day that day. Overall, in that 3-week period, you are still going to be in a massive calorie deficit that is going to drive fat loss. There's always flexibility to be explored and utilized to your advantage.
The best part of an aggressive approach is even if you overshoot slightly on some days, like let's say you're aiming for a 1,000 calorie deficit, but you go out and have food and you pick an option on the menu, like one of our members did recently. They chose what they thought was a healthy option on the menu. They actually avoided something that they wanted and picked something else because they thought it was a healthier option. And then they went on the website when they got home to try and track it. And they realized they picked a meal that was 1,100 calories. And they were like, oh, what, how? And it had some sort of cream cheese or something in it that they didn't know. That happens. So let's say, for example, you make a decision like that where you want to be in a 1,000 calorie deficit. You make a bad food choice. Instead of being in a 1,000 calorie deficit, you're in a 500 calorie deficit. Oh no, I've ruined it. I've ruined the aggressive diet protocol. Well, no, because you're still in a 500 calorie deficit. So by aiming to be more aggressive with this, even if you make a mistake, not that we're encouraging you to not be diligent, not that we're encouraging you to miss things off your tracker, but even if you do on one-off occasions, you're still going to be in a deficit and you're still going to be losing fat. It's such a broad safety net. Katie, have you got any comments from clients that have experienced the aggressive diet? What have they said?
Let me just bring up my library. I'm actually going to read some off because I think it's quite powerful, not just to come from our perspective all of the time. Looking forward to another week of aggressive dieting and doing 3 sessions in the gym at the same time. So it's not I'm going into an aggressive diet, I'm hating it and I'm dreading going to the gym. It's I'm looking forward to another week of aggressive dieting. Another one. I lost more body fat in 3 weeks than I had in a moderate deficit in 6 weeks. So I was really happy, really happy. Another one. Feeling brilliant post AD. New low weigh-in today. Absolutely thrilled. A lot of people noticed in work yesterday asked, was I doing the jab? The look on my face said all they needed to know.
Amazing.
I'm keen for more AD. Who have I become, Katie? What have you done with me? Honestly, who would have thought I'd be keen to diet again? I think those comments alone debunk a lot of the claims that are associated with aggressive dieting. And that's just a handful, right? I could keep going and going here and keep scrolling. If you are a person that had some of those apprehensions with aggressive dieting, I would challenge you just to explore some of those claims and open your mind to other possibilities.
So, summary of the podcast: if aggressive dieting is an option for you, we believe it is the best option you can choose.
100%. And most of the information given out publicly about dieting is safe, but it lacks context, right? It lacks a lot of context.
And it often keeps people stuck.
Yeah, I agree.
A correctly set up and well implemented aggressive diet is more effective than a moderate.
It is not harder, worse to stick to, or more damaging in the long run. In fact, it could be quite the opposite.
There are different approaches to aggressive dieting that work. You don't have to copy someone else's approach like for like, and you can still experience flexibility within your own approach.
And we have a track record and experience with our members to back up the theory.
Many of you listening to this would have tried some form of quick fix or diet that promises fast fat loss. It probably worked for a bit, but you felt utterly garbage whilst doing it. And we can understand the apprehension of doing a faster approach again. In fact, it may not even be the right thing for you. But hopefully, by listening to this podcast, you'll realize that aggressive fat loss doesn't have to be as bad as it's made out to be. In many cases, it's much better for you. We can show you how to make the most out of faster fat loss with Sculpted, our new package designed to cut your fat loss time in half. If you want to learn more, how it works, how long it lasts, what to expect, and the pricing, check out the link in the description below. You can grab a chat with one of us personally if you want to ask questions or make sure it's the right fit for you. A small side note: if a faster approach isn't suitable, we'll tell you honestly, and we'll guide you towards something more suitable for you instead. Hit the link below to get everything you need sent to your inbox. We're only running this until the 16th of March, so act fast if you don't want to miss out.
On that note, we'll be back next week with a step-by-step tutorial on how to build a repeatable nutrition structure to completely transform your body composition.